2 months ago, I walked out of the hospital with a new heart beating in my chest. It's surreal how something that's supposed to keep you alive can also feel like a ticking time bomb. If it weren't for my 23andMe results a few years back, I might have ignored all the warning signs of cardiac amyloidosis. That's a fancy way of saying my heart walls were thickening with no sign of stopping. I was 27, fit, and had no business thinking about heart failure. But there I was, circling the drain without even knowing it. Here's something people don't tell you about heart transplants. Unless the donor's family decides to reach out, you'll probably never know whose organ you're walking away with. It's a strange kind of anonymity, like borrowing a life without knowing whose it was. In my case, all the hospital could tell me was that he was some guy in his 30s, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. It was a near-perfect match, so I couldn't say no. The days following my dismissal were terrible. All hours of the day, pain radiated from the wound on my chest like a hot knife tracing up my sternum. I got to spend my time wasting away at home, while my girlfriend, Amy, had to continue her life as a server as if her boyfriend wasn't at home, getting acquainted with a freshly dead man's heart. The nights when Amy was away were the hardest. Survivor's guilt is one thing, but there's nothing quite like the weight of keeping a dead man's heart beating just because you're too stubborn to give up. I found solace in whatever small comforts I could, and for a few days that turned out to be a jar of peanut butter. Especially late at night, when Amy was working, I'd sit in front of the TV with a jar and a spoon, letting it take the edge off. The only issue? I've always hated peanut butter. This was nothing to me at the time. I did my research from the moment I put myself on the list and knew this happened sometimes. I had heard about other transplant receivers getting weird changes in cravings, sudden new interests, and shifts in their personalities, but I never imagined it would happen so drastically and so soon. Also, I never saw any of them mention the changes to their dreams. A month into my recovery, I finally cleared through all the prescribed medications, and my physical condition started to return to normal. Recovery wasn't exactly smooth, and adjusting to life post-surgery had its hurdles. Amy was picking up extra shifts to support both of us until I could get back to work, leaving me alone to manage the house. I pushed the limits of this new heart, trying to do anything I could just to take some of the burden off her. But all of my efforts only ever amounted to small things like cleaning a few dishes at a time or sweeping the house. I would be left to watch from the couch as she would get home from a long day and still have to do the Herculean tasks like taking out the trash. Still, the routine helped. By the end of the day, I was tired enough to finally sleep through the night. For the first time since the surgery, I was consistently getting a full 8 hours of sleep. It was a welcome relief to have some experiences outside the confines of the house, even if they were only in my mind. The time alone at home gave me ample opportunities to parse through what I saw on my eyelids every night. I recall dreams being difficult to remember the farther you drifted through the day, but I guess the boredom of my home life and my recent introductory back to them left me in a perfect lens to remember them semi-vividly. Nothing stood out too drastically upon my first few days of reflection, but 2 weeks in I noticed a trend. No matter what weirdness was happening in my dreams, there was always a recurring character. I'm not talking about the same way Amy, my parents, or my close friends would show up in my dreams. This was a man I had never seen before. It also seemed that, unlike the appearances my family and friends would make, this man was never a prominent character. The first time I noticed his recurrence, he was a visitor at an amusement park Amy and I were visiting. The next, he was just another patron eating at the same restaurant as a friend and I, and after that, he was a new hire at my job. I didn't know what to think. I've heard psychologists say that every person in your dreams is someone you've seen before because the brain can't create what it's never seen, but now I knew they had to be wrong in some way. Maybe I'm just a scientific anomaly and my brain can do what others can't, but who cares? That wasn't the point I focused on. Instead, I found my mind lingering on the sole fact, whoever this man was, the distance between us was getting shorter every time I fell asleep. Should I tell Amy? Is this even something I should be concerned with? What would she think, once again working a double, just to come home to a boyfriend being scared of a random dude in his dreams who isn't even doing anything particularly frightening? Am I just freaking out over nothing? I decided to tell her when she got back from work that day. We were sitting at the table eating another late night dinner that she cooked, with which I helped. I didn't know how to start the conversation in a reasonable place without it sounding trivial, so I opened it where I thought it made sense. Babe, have you been having weird dreams lately? The tired eyes that peered up from her plate looked as though she hadn't been sleeping at all. I mean, not really. My latest few have been work dreams, which sucks, but nothing out of the ordinary. Why? Have I been mumbling again? I couldn't tell if that was a serious question or an attempt at a heartwarming callback to when we first started dating 3 years ago. No, it's just that I've had a few weird ones in a row and I'm not sure why. She didn't immediately respond, so I took the inquisitive furrowing of her brow and silence as a cue to keep going. There's this guy I keep seeing and I don't recognize him. One day, he's at the same store as us. The next, I see him walking down the side of the road, and then he's there in a restaurant with me. And wherever he is, I never get a full view of his face. I didn't realize it, but my slow, deliberate tone was speeding up with each example. I continued to rattle off more and more until I realized Amy's curious expression was starting to falter and shift to something else. I managed to catch myself before I got to see what expression she would have next and let out a deep exhale. Point is, Amy, this random guy I'm seeing in my dreams keeps getting closer to me, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if it means something, and if it does, I don't know what. Sorry if I sound crazy for even bringing it up, but I felt like I had to tell someone. In her eyes, I watched as her accumulated fatigue and stress swiftly snuffed out any curiosity in her eyes, like the final light in a house being switched off before bed. Luckily, there was little anyone in this world could do to wash out the compassion she always had in those very same eyes. Andrew, I think you're overthinking this. It's probably just your meds giving you weird dreams. Shit, maybe it was someone you saw while going under for the surgery that your subconscious remembers but you don't. That would explain not seeing his whole face. It was covered by an N95 when you saw it. Even sleep-deprived and exhausted, Amy always managed to prove her intellect, even if it was just by analyzing my dumb dreams. It hurt knowing that the money we had to spend on this procedure was the only thing keeping her waiting tables instead of finishing her nursing degree. Our conversation was left at as we finished our food and continued our night. I could feel each blink taking longer than the last and knew I'd be asleep soon. I wasn't sure if I was ready to learn what the hell was really happening, but I was getting tired of it, so I had no other choice. With the helpful insight from Amy's explanation, I was ready to confront this figure and put it all behind me. In the final moments as I drifted off to sleep, I conjured a pristine baby blue surgical mask over the blurry fragments of memory I had to construct his face. I opened my eyes as if I had never closed them at all and found myself on a busy city street, midway for the first taxi that would be kind enough to stop. I didn't get a look at the driver as I swung the back door open and slid inside. The air in the cabin was dense and stale, pressing against my skin like a damp cloth left to rot. It was frigid, cold enough that each breath unfurled into a slow haze, seeping into the space as if my lungs themselves were leaking from a slow wound. The door shut with a soft click. By my next blink, the city outside these cab windows was gone. No lights, no voices, and no trace it ever existed. In its place stretched a vast, snow-covered forest, the trees packed so tightly together they swallowed the horizon. The thin two-lane road beneath the car was the only thing separating us from the darkness between the trunks. The cab wasn't moving. Had it ever been? The driver sat motionless, hands on the wheel, his face obscured by a shadow that had no source. It clung to him, swallowing every detail, shifting slightly as if aware of my gaze. But I knew him. I recognized his frame, his scraggly dark hair, and the same dull gray shirt I always noticed him in. This was it, my chance, if I could just bring myself to speak. Who the fuck are you? The cold air clawed down my throat as I spoke, burning like frostbite from the inside out. My breath came out in shuddering clouds, but the driver didn't react. He just sat there, silent, as his head slowly turned. I had braced myself for an answer, but not for what I saw. As he turned to face me, the skin and muscle beneath his nose had been shredded, leaving behind a cavernous mess of splintered bone and mangled flesh. Loose teeth clung to the ruin of his gums, some barely hanging on by strands of tissue. The lower half of his face was an open, gaping wound, a wet cave of exposed muscle and cartilage, glistening with streams of fresh blood. What was left of his jaw hung by threads of sinew and shredded tendon, swaying as if it had been torn apart just seconds ago. Fresh blood splattered against the dashboard, thick and glistening, as if the wound was still happening. My stomach churned. I didn't get the chance to take in the full extent of the damage before the voice hit me like a wall, but it didn't come from him. It couldn't have. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere real. Why? I could barely process what I heard before slipping into a freefall. A dark void as far as I could see, but as quickly as I slipped backwards into the darkness, I jolted awake in bed. I gasped for air as if I hadn't taken a breath in years. Amy rubbed her eyes and sat up with me. Her warm embrace was comforting enough to assure me I had for certain woken up. No words were spoken for about a minute as I finished gathering my breath. I was nervous to describe what I saw to Amy, as if a mere allusion to its disgusting visage could somehow bring it into our world. I saw his face. His whole face. I mean, what's left of it. Amy's gaze burned into the side of my head as I forced myself to look anywhere but the shadow-drenched foot of our bed. What's left of it? Her voice was careful, laced with concern. Honey, what do you mean? I've never seen you wake up like this. Are you okay? The slow, rhythmic circles she traced on my back did just enough to keep my nerves from spiraling, but her question still hung in the air, weighty and waiting. I spent the rest of the night telling her everything. What I saw, what I heard, the way the voice didn't come from him, but from somewhere deeper. She listened, comforting me the best she could, but eventually, sleep pulled at her eyelids again. A small part of me wanted to ask her to stay awake, to sit with me in the silence of our bedroom, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I whispered a second goodnight, watching her sink back into sleep. I knew I could talk to her about this another time, when she was more coherent. and then I was alone with the dark. I kept my eyes fixed on the void beyond our bed all night. It's the next day now. Amy went to work like usual. I'm afraid to go back to sleep. I erase memories for a living, and I used to be the best at it. Last year, I won an award for erasing the memories of 152 people, the highest in the company. I got a bronze plaque with my name on it and a gift card worth $50. Since then, I haven't known a moment of peace. The erasure procedure is actually quite simple. While I program the operation on the computer, the patient lies inside the machine, which closes around them. Inside, they must speak aloud, usually for 2 or 3 hours, about the event they wish to erase. As they recount their story in detail, we bombard them with images, sounds, and smells related to the event, keeping the memory vivid. After it ends, the patient passes out under sedation and wakes up at home with no recollection of the erased event or the procedure itself. The session recordings are saved in our database to ensure service integrity. The memories people choose to delete are completely gone. There were rumors of a new machine in development that could even create new memories to replace the ones erased. I loved the job and the visa it provided me, but it was tough and took a toll on me physically and mentally. Most of our clients sought to erase traumatic moments, usually caused by their own actions. The things I witnessed daily are disturbing. There was Devin, a retired mechanic who wanted to erase the memories of his marriage, which had ended in a bitter divorce. And there was Jenny, an addict, who wanted me to erase the car crash she caused while intoxicated, killing her 3 children. Then there was Mark, an ex-military officer who wanted me to erase all the torture sessions he had conducted over 10 years of overseas missions. He was particularly difficult to treat since I had to go into detail about each case, making the procedure last 10 gruesome hours. The military was actually our biggest account, and our clinics were strategically located near their facilities. All operators lived on the road, staying in hotels paid for by the company, and since most of us were immigrant workers, we had little contact with the outside. We lived for the job. And while I couldn't help but appreciate the benefits, the fact remained that the terrible events I erased hadn't disappeared completely. They were still trapped in me. I had been the operator after all, the holder of the most wicked stories. They plagued me with nightmares and insomnia night after night until I reached my breaking point. One Sunday, I knocked on Rav's room, another operator, and confessed that I couldn't take it anymore. Quitting wasn't an option. The company had a strict contract that would force me to cover many of their costs. What I needed was a relief. Rav had a dangerous but intriguing idea. He proposed to perform the procedure on me, erasing the most traumatic cases I dealt with. Just a quick session regarding those patients, he said, sipping the beer I had brought us. And you'll be last year's model operator again. An operator undergoing an erasure procedure was strictly prohibited by the company and would result in immediate termination, but I was desperate, so I suggested we could do it at night when the clinic was closed. And so it happened. As my manager's favorite, I had a copy of the keys so I could open the establishment in the morning when he couldn't. We entered through the front door, cautiously checking if anyone was watching us from the street. Rav turned on the operation room lights, and I laid down in the machine as Rav began the initial programming. A few minutes later, he brought me the dream injection. The dream injection is the first step of erasure, where we administer substances into the patient's bloodstream to facilitate the procedure. It is also when the machine gets the DNA of the patient and generates a unique ID for database storage. The injection didn't hurt, and as I prepared for the long session ahead, Rav suddenly showed me, in disbelief, the warning displayed on the system. Caution. I-119184. This is a second erasure procedure. Asterisk. We operators knew exactly what that message meant. I had seen it before when problematic clients returned to erase new traumas. The warning meant that the person being scanned had already undergone an erasure before. A second erasure had a high risk of brain damage. But I had no idea I had ever gone through one. Rav was just as shocked as I was. We tried again, removing and reinserting the injection, and the warning kept the same. I struggled to recall if there were any gaps in my memory, but nothing stood out. My life story had been a common escape from my strict parents and homeland to seek a better future in this country, just like many other operators who endured long hours, below average pay, and a permission to stay in the country. Maybe we could check the database to see if there was actually a record. It was possible that it was just an error. I didn't have viewer access to check the recordings of erasures. I could only register new patients. But I thought my manager might have access, and I knew his password. I entered it, and it worked. Searching for the ID from the warning, we found a folder with a file. My hands went cold as I pressed play. The video wasn't from a clinic, or at least, it didn't look like one. It was shot in a dark, cramped place with dirty floors and makeshift computer setups. The machine was much larger than ours, seemingly more powerful. I had never seen anything like it. The video began with the operator, a man in military attire, preparing the equipment for my arrival. When I appeared, I clearly wasn't there by choice. My arms were chained, my face blindfolded, escorted by 2 guards. Pale and thin, they threw me into the machine. Black marks covered my arms and legs. "Now, do as we ordered," the operator commanded. "Or tomorrow, we'll try it again when you finally break." The patient, myself, seemed confused and reluctant, but eventually began speaking. He started from the beginning, his earliest memories from childhood. It became clear to me that wasn't a session to erase a single event. It was to erase most, if not all, of my life. The story he told in the recording was so foreign to me that I couldn't help but question if it was really me on that table. The man spoke of living in a country far, far away from where I believed I was born, about a loving father and mother I never knew, about a younger sister and an older brother who taught him how to play chess. He spoke of a war that began suddenly on a rainy winter night, of bombs that fell on his village, killing half of his family. The drones took care of the other half. Of helicopters and planes from which soldiers descended full of rage, taking him away blindfolded. Of months spent in the dark, eating scraps, treated like an animal by his captors. He told his whole story right up to the moment he was in. After that extensive session, the machine emitted the sounds and signals of a completed erasure and the patient passed out. Then a second phase began, something strange to me and Rav. Our equipment doesn't have a second phase. A green liquid started entering my veins and the machine glowed differently, revealing something we couldn't fully see in the video. We only understood what it was when another soldier entered the room to speak with the operator. "His new memory should be fully implanted in about an hour," the operator told the soldier. "Can you wait so we can grab lunch?" We stayed up until dawn watching the sessions we uncovered in the database. I wasn't the only one. Rav was from a village neighboring mine, just like dozens of other operators. The rest came from different countries, from Southeast Asia to South America. They were all brought to this country, faceless and memoryless, grateful for not living in the dark past their enemies had invented for them, thankful for their temporary visa and minimum wage. I never wept like I did that night. But the next morning I didn't quit the job. In fact, I haven't to this day. Every night for months now, Rav and I have been sneaking into the clinic, saving recording after recording onto our own drive, waiting for the day it will all come to light. Since we can't bring our past back, we can at least try to build a new future here. Even if it comes with fire,